Can disease diminish your state of consciousness, your level of consciousness? Does it have any relationship towards enlightenment and awakening, to spirituality? Hello, this is Chris speaking, Shores of Infinity, with a video about disease and consciousness, disease and enlightenment. Is there any connection? Is it possible that any kind of physical or psychological disease can diminish your state or level of consciousness? From a cold or backache or migraine via any kind of chronic disease until psychological diseases or old age diseases. Does that impinge upon your level of consciousness, or can it? First of all, we have to define what disease is, because there is no one definition. The official modern Western materialistic definition of disease is the absence of health, but there's no definition of health either. So there's this idea of either you're sick or healthy, but healthy is just normal, comfortable okayness. There's no definition of health. While in most other systems of medicine like Ayurveda and ancient Chinese medicine and whatever, many systems, osteopathy and so on, health is a thing. Health is a power of the subtle body, and this can be disturbed, and a disturbed health, a disturbed energy system, a disturbed subtle body produces symptoms that we call disease. But there is no such a thing as a disease, and there certainly is no such a thing as a autoimmune disease. The idea that there are autoimmune diseases is totally ludicrous from a point of most systems of medicine. Only in modern Western materialistic medicine there's the theory that the body attacks itself, that the immune system can attack itself, which is of course nonsense. It doesn't. What the body does, or what the subtle body does, is it attacks a certain type of disturbance or agent of disturbance, like bacteria or viruses or amoeba or cancer cells, and then it looks like it attacks itself, but it doesn't. So modern Western medicine is equipped for emergencies. It's very good for acute problems, emergencies, broken bones, and so on. It's not very good in diagnosing and treating chronic diseases or psychological diseases. Actually, it's not equipped at all to treat psychological diseases. If you have any psychological trouble, you're being sent to a psychiatrist who gives you drugs, or to a psychologist who is likely to try psychoanalysis or behavioral theory on you, which are two systems that worked well 100 years ago, but now are out of date. You need something else. In spinamics terms, most modern Western technical materialistic types of medicine are orangish, can be blue as well, or have strong orange and blue aspects, and most other so-called alternative therapies are turquoiseish. Why? Because materialistic medicine only supposes one body, the gross body, while the other systems know that there's at least one more body, which we call the subtle body. And while the materialistic type of medicine tries to cure the gross body because it only knows the gross body, all other styles treat mainly the subtle body. Also the gross body, or via the gross body, like osteopathy, for example, it uses the bones as a lever. But if you take Acupuncture, for example, there you treat the chi, and the chi is nothing else than the subtle body. So via the subtle body, you treat all the bodies. And if the subtle body is healthy, then the gross body tends to become healthy as well. Now, why am I talking about all this? Because there were so many questions and comments recently about health. One question was, if you're sick, like a cold or a backache, is it possible that the state of consciousness drops? Because it feels like that often. And yes, it does. It does drop for some time, not permanently, but momentarily, during the thick of the symptoms. How is it with chronic diseases, like so-called autoimmune diseases or cancer and so on? Yes, also here the level of consciousness can drop, but it can also rise. Any kind of crisis can drop or raise your level of consciousness. How about psychological diseases? Well, with the exception of schizophrenia and personality disorders, this is more complex. Let's go into this another time, into those. But most of the psychological diseases or disturbances will tend to diminish your level of consciousness. Or let's say make it unstable. Make it unstable instable is probably the better term. It causes instability. So anyway, the consciousness, state of consciousness, levels of consciousness go up and down. It's not linear upwards. But if you have psychological problems like a panic disorder, for example, or depression, then this up and down, both the frequency and the intensity of these ups and downs will increase in most cases. That's why trauma therapy is such an important thing, and that's why coaching is so much in demand these days. Then what about old age diseases? They're tricky. It has been discovered that if you're quite healthy in your old age, then your consciousness towards death in the years before death usually shoots up and becomes very high. While if you're riddled by old age diseases, especially brain diseases like dementia and Alzheimer's and stuff, it goes down. So the soul is not in the brain, or the soul is not the brain, but the brain certainly does have a relationship with consciousness. It's something like a motherboard. If your motherboard is not, if the motherboard of your computer has funky bugs, then this causes problems. Basically, they're problems of translation. We cannot live without our gross body. Our gross body is not everything we have, but the higher bodies, or the more subtle bodies like the subtle and the causal body, they will express themselves via the gross physical body. So if there's an impairment of the structures of the physical body, then the other two bodies will have problems very often to implement, to translate themselves into the material reality. And lastly, we have things like bugs, like viruses and bacteria, for example, or poisons, like heavy metals and certain chemicals in our food, or even radiation. Unfortunately, these can also influence our more subtle bodies. including things like antibiotics. They're not very good for the subtle body. They might be good for the gross body, but not for the subtle body. So it is a good idea to care for your body, for your gross body, to keep it healthy. That is a good idea. It's not necessary for higher consciousness, but it's a very good idea. The same goes for food quality. I'm always surprised what kind of low, bad food quality people eat and then think it has no effect. Or exercise. Our body is made to walk or run 10, 20 kilometers per day. Like, what's that, 20 kilometers in miles? About 12 and a half miles. So our body is made for that. So it's a good thing to oblige and not do something that is totally against the way we are made, like sitting all day long. That's not healthy. So because diseases can influence our level of consciousness, it's a good thing to live a healthy life. Unfortunately, only because you're living a healthy life and only because you have a higher level or state of consciousness doesn't mean you won't get sick. This way around, unfortunately, it doesn't work. You can get sick anytime, and certainly enlightened people also get sick. They must die of something eventually. In the end, everyone dies of heart failure, brain failure, kidney failure, or liver failure, or whatever. It happens sooner or later, so this is unavoidable. Even enlightened people can even die of cancer. It has happened many times. You're not immune to diseases only because you're enlightened. That is a common mistake. But what is possible is you can use your subtle body and your causal body to influence your gross body. You can heal yourself and others with siddhis from your subtle and causal body. Of course, there are things like energy healing. Only there are siddhis, and siddhis are always very dangerous because they are the biggest door for the ego to come back and take control. Yet once again, so the best thing if you get siddhis is to not use them or use them as sparingly as possible. But one thing I forgot to tell you, this is all spontaneous. There's nothing I say here is scripted. That's why I forgot the other side of old age. I said, usually, if you're healthy, then you get wiser and wiser in your old age. Your consciousness will rise until the moment of death, where it can also spike up. But if you're not healthy, then it can drop also. That is why many gurus, very famous gurus, said strange things in their last years or months or weeks of their lives, because their consciousness actually diminished. They fell out of enlightenment. Sadly, this is also possible. So what can we learn from this? To summarize, firstly, there are three bodies. If we talk about health and disease, we always have to take into account that there are three bodies, not one. All three of them have to be healthy. It's not helpful if you only look for the health of the gross body, and it's also not helpful if you only concentrate on the health of the subtle and mental body and then forget about your gross body. Secondly, the state of health of any one of those bodies has an effect on your level of consciousness. There are spiritual disciplines which focus on the mental body, although people have no idea about their gross and subtle body. So this is not very effective. Just today I talked to someone who practices Sahaj Marg, now called heartfulness, which is a style of Raja Yoga, which also incorporates other styles of yoga, but it's mostly Raja Yoga. And it used to be focused on the causal body, but now they incorporate exercises and techniques for the gross and subtle body as well. Secondly, health is not the opposite of disease. And disease is not the absence of health. Disease is a disturbance of health. Disease, what we call disease, are actually symptoms. And symptoms are cries for help by the gross and subtle bodies. So be very careful with drugs that weaken your immune system, like steroids or chemotherapy. Your immune system is partly gross and partly subtle body, and it has an intelligence of its own, and it wants to be healthy, and it will recuperate and regenerate and heal. So it's not a good idea to stop this natural process. Thirdly, both health and consciousness is a conglomerate, is a combination, is a harmony of the three bodies: gross, subtle, and causal. There's still a lot of misunderstandings what the subtle and causal bodies are. The physical, the gross body is the body that you know from day to day, that has to eat and to sleep and to shit and so on. The subtle body is your energetical body, whatever people call it, aura or what, prana and chi and so on. Well, the causal body is something that you could call the soul. It's not exactly the same, but it comes very close. But the causal body you can only contact if you stop thinking. If you still have all this babbling, this chittering in your head, you cannot contact, you cannot be aware of your causal mental body. And lastly, for today's video, don't worry if your level of consciousness goes down temporarily if you have any kind of acute sickness or disease. That's normal. Don't worry about it. It will come back up. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you to all my patrons. Thank you for joining me as a patron. Thank you for giving this video a thumbs up. It helps other people find this channel. Thank you for liking and subscribing, and see you soon.